The strongest man in the room is rarely the one speaking the most. It is the man who has learned the dangerous art of emotional silence. The moment a woman realizes she can no longer control your reactions, no longer pull emotions out of you with attention, distance, affection, or manipulation, the power dynamic changes completely, because most people are addicted to being emotionally understood. Very few can survive being calmly ignored. Most men never realize that attention is not kindness, love, or loyalty. It is currency, emotional currency. And like anything valuable in human psychology, the moment it becomes too available, it begins to lose power. This is the hidden dynamic behind why certain people command obsession without chasing, while others give everything and slowly become invisible. Human beings are not always drawn toward what is freely offered. They are drawn toward what feels emotionally earned, psychologically uncertain, and slightly out of reach. The uncomfortable truth is that many men spend attention impulsively because they are unconsciously seeking validation through access. They reply instantly, explain themselves too much, constantly check messages, overinflated, earned, saying emotionally too early, and make a woman the psychological center of their day without realizing the silent signal they are sending. Your attention matters more than mine. At first, this intensity may feel flattering, but over time, people begin to value attention based on the difficulty required to receive it. What comes too easily rarely feels emotionally significant for long. This is why the man who is always available often becomes emotionally predictable, and predictability slowly kills psychological tension. The human mind is strangely wired. It becomes curious about what it cannot fully control. Notice how people obsess over delayed responses, unexplained distance, or emotional restraint far more than constant reassurance. Silence creates space, and space forces the other person to think. That thinking creates emotional weight. Most men panic in silence because they fear losing connection. But emotionally intelligent people understand that controlled absence often reveals more than endless presence ever could. Watch human behavior carefully. The person who constantly seeks attention becomes emotionally dependent on reactions. Their mood rises and falls based on replies, earned, validation and approval. And once someone senses that dependency, the balance of power quietly shifts. Because people instinctively respect those who appear emotionally self-contained. Not cold, not cruel, controlled. There is a reason calm individuals leave stronger impressions than loud ones. They are not leaking emotional energy everywhere. They are selective, intentional, disciplined. In relationships, the man who cannot control his attention eventually loses control of himself. He begins chasing reassurance instead of maintaining self-respect. And the tragedy is that most of this happens unconsciously. The deepest form of attraction has never been desperation, performance, or constant pursuit. It has always been emotional stability mixed with restraint. The moment your attention becomes something you hand out carelessly, people stop seeing it as valuable and start seeing you the same way. Most people believe emotional attachment brings clarity to relationships, but the opposite is often true. Attachment blinds. It distorts perception. It makes intelligent people ignore obvious disrespect, rationalize manipulation, and misread intentions simply because they are emotionally earned, invested in the outcome. This is why emotional detachment is so psychologically powerful. It removes the fog. The moment you stop needing someone emotionally, you begin seeing them exactly as they are instead of who you hoped they would become. Human behavior changes dramatically when people realize they can no longer control your emotions. Watch carefully what happens when you stop reacting instantly, stop over-explaining, stop chasing reassurance, and stop feeding every emotional tension with attention. Some people suddenly become calmer and more respectful because their intentions were genuine from the beginning. Others become irritated, distant, or manipulative because they were never attached to you emotionally. They were attached to the control they had over you. That is the uncomfortable truth most people never notice. Many relationships are not built on connection. They are built on emotional leverage. One person becomes addicted to attention, validation, or emotional dependency, while the other quietly benefits from holding psychological power. The moment that dependency disappears, hidden motives rise to the surface. Emotional detachment exposes character faster than confrontation ever will. A manipulative person can survive arguments because arguments are emotional. But they struggle deeply against calm indifference because there is nothing to control. Silence forces people to reveal themselves. You begin noticing patterns that emotions once covered: the delayed replies only when it benefits them, the sudden affection after distance, the guilt tactics, the subtle disrespect disguised as jokes, the way some people only value your presence after feeling your absence. Detached observation transforms human behavior into something almost predictable. You stop listening only to words and start studying emotional patterns. And patterns never lie. This does not mean becoming cold or heartless. That is where most people misunderstand emotional control. True detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the ability to feel without losing judgment. It is remaining calm enough to observe reality without your desires rewriting it. Powerful people understand this instinctively. They never allow emotions to rush them into decisions because they know emotions are temporary, but consequences are not. Most suffering in relationships comes from refusing to see what is directly in front of us. We cling to potential, memories, attraction, loneliness, anything except reality. But reality becomes brutally clear the moment emotional dependency disappears. Because when people can no longer use your emotions against you, their true intentions stop hiding behind their words. And one of the harshest awakenings in life is realizing that some people never loved your presence, they loved your emotional submission. Most people believe power comes from speaking clearly, defending themselves and explaining their intentions. But in human psychology, excessive explanation is often a hidden form of weakness. The more emotionally desperate a person becomes to be understood, the more they reveal their need for approval. This is why silence carries such unsettling psychological power. Silence forces people to sit alone with their own assumptions, fears, and interpretations. And the human mind is deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. When you explain every action, defend every misunderstanding, and react to every accusation, you remove tension from the interaction. You give people emotional access to your inner state. But when you remain calm and silent, especially eccentrically in emotionally charged situations, something strange begins to happen. People start exposing themselves. They fill the silence with projections, insecurities, overthinking, and emotional assumptions. Silence becomes a mirror, and most people are terrified of what they see reflected back at them. Watch human behavior carefully during conflict. The weaker person usually speaks first, reacts first, and explains the most. They rush to clear misunderstandings because they fear losing control of how they are perceived. But emotionally disciplined individuals understand a deeper truth. People rarely believe explanations as much as they believe emotional presence. A calm silence often communicates more confidence than 1,000 defensive words ever could. This is why certain people can walk into a room, say very little, and still dominate the emotional atmosphere. Their silence creates mystery. And mystery naturally commands attention because the mind becomes obsessed with trying to decode what it cannot fully read. There is also a darker side to this truth that most people never realize. The more you explain yourself to manipulative individuals, the more information they gather about your emotional triggers. Every defensive reaction reveals insecurity. Every emotional outburst exposes where you can be controlled. Manipulators survive through reaction. They provoke, then study your response. But silence interrupts their ability to emotionally steer the interaction. It denies them access to your inner world. This is why calm silence often frustrates emotionally controlling people more than anger ever could. Anger still gives them engagement. Silence gives them distance. This does not mean silence should become passive aggression or emotional punishment. True psychological silence is controlled restraint. It is the ability to remain emotionally grounded without feeling the compulsive need to prove yourself to everyone around you. Powerful people understand that not every accusation deserves a defense, not every misunderstanding deserves correction, and not every conflict deserves access to your energy. Sometimes the strongest statement a person can make is no statement at all. Because once you master silence, you begin to notice a brutal truth about human nature. The people who demand constant explanations are often the same people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. Most people believe influence is created through persuasion, affection, or constant effort. But one of the most powerful forms of influence is far quieter and far more unsettling: the ability to walk away without emotional collapse. Human beings are deeply affected by what they cannot control, and nothing exposes emotional dependence faster than realizing someone is fully willing to leave, not through anger, threats, or dramatic exits, but through calm detachment. This creates what can only be described as invisible influence. The moment people sense that your emotional stability does not depend on their approval, behavior begins to shift around you. Respect increases, manipulation weakens, emotional games lose power, because most interactions between people are built on silent negotiations of need. Whoever needs the other person more usually sacrifices their standards first. They tolerate disrespect, chase clarity, over-explain, and slowly abandon self-respect in exchange for emotional security. But the person who can walk away calmly changes the entire psychological dynamic without saying a word. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals often appear magnetic without trying. Their energy communicates something rare. I value my peace more than I fear your absence. And that message quietly unsettles people. Most individuals are accustomed to emotional attachment giving them leverage. They expect guilt to work, silence to provoke panic, distance to trigger pursuit. But when someone remains composed and fully prepared to leave rather than beg for validation, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty forces people to reassess your value. Watch how human behavior changes when access to you no longer feels guaranteed. Suddenly, the same attention once taken for granted becomes meaningful. The same presence once ignored becomes psychologically heavy. People rarely appreciate emotional consistency while they feel fully in control of it. Appreciation often begins the moment loss becomes real. There is also a harsh truth hidden beneath this dynamic that many people spend years avoiding. Most emotional suffering does not come from losing people. It comes from refusing to walk away when respect has already disappeared. People stay too long in situations that slowly destroy their confidence because they mistake attachment for earned loyalty. They fear loneliness more than emotional erosion. So they negotiate with disrespect, hoping effort will restore what self-abandonment already weakened. But the ability to walk away is not cruelty. It is self-preservation. It is recognizing that some connections survive only because one person keeps sacrificing dignity to maintain them. Powerful people understand something most never learn. Influence is not always created by holding on tighter. Sometimes it is created by releasing your grip completely, because when a person realizes you can leave peacefully, without hatred, pleading, or emotional chaos, they are forced to confront a terrifying possibility that your self-respect is stronger than your attachment to them. And nothing alters human behavior faster than realizing you no longer have emotional control over someone you once thought would never leave. Most men believe attraction is maintained through affection, attention, and constant reassurance. But beneath the surface of human behavior lies a quieter and more uncomfortable truth. Many women are not only observing how much you care, they are observing how emotionally stable you remain when pressure enters the relationship. This happens far more unconsciously than people realize. Small moments of distance, emotional unpredictability, delayed replies, disagreement, or subtle challenges are often less about conflict and more about observation. The question being asked beneath the behavior is rarely spoken directly. How easily can your emotions be controlled? Because emotional reactions reveal psychological structure. A man who immediately becomes anxious, angry, defensive, needy, or desperate under emotional tension communicates something dangerous, without realizing it, that his emotional state depends heavily on external validation, and dependency always weakens perceived strength. Watch carefully how many men lose control the moment emotional certainty disappears. A woman becomes slightly distant, and suddenly he overthinks every message. She delays a reply, and he begins chasing reassurance. She challenges him emotionally, and he reacts impulsively, trying to force clarity through emotion. In those moments, the relationship quietly shifts. not because he cared too much, but because he revealed that he could not regulate himself under uncertainty. Human beings instinctively feel safer, around people who remain emotionally grounded during tension. This is why calmness under pressure creates such deep psychological impact. It signals internal stability. It communicates that your identity is not collapsing every time emotions fluctuate. This does not mean women consciously sit around designing tests. Human behavior is far more instinctive than that. People naturally probe emotional boundaries to understand what kind of person they are dealing with. A woman may challenge your patience, disagree strongly, become emotionally inconsistent, or pull away slightly without fully understanding why she is doing it herself. But beneath these behaviors, one thing is being measured constantly: your emotional composure. Can you stay centered without becoming cold? Can you maintain self-respect without losing control? Can you tolerate uncertainty without panicking? Most people fail here because modern relationships have conditioned emotional impulsiveness. They confuse intense reactions with love, emotional chasing with passion, and anxiety with attachment. But psychologically, uncontrolled emotion rarely creates security. It creates instability. There is a reason emotionally disciplined individuals leave stronger impressions than emotionally reactive ones. Calmness creates mystery. Restraint creates trust. And self-control creates silent authority. The man who remains composed under emotional pressure appears difficult to manipulate because his emotions are not easily hijacked by temporary feelings. That emotional steadiness becomes deeply attractive because it feels rare in a world full of impulsive reactions. In the end, people may listen to your words, but they study your emotional patterns far more carefully. And one of the harshest truths about human nature is this: many people stop respecting you the moment they realize your emotions can be controlled by their behavior. Most people misunderstand power because they only recognize its loud forms. They think power is dominance, aggression, status, money, or the ability to control others. But the most dangerous form of power has always been far quieter and far more rare: self-control. A person who can govern their own emotions becomes almost impossible to manipulate. And this is what unsettles people on a psychological level. Human beings constantly study each other for emotional openings. They observe Hat triggers insecurity, anger, jealousy, desperation, ego, or fear. The moment someone discovers what controls your emotions, they discover where your behavior becomes predictable. And predictable people are easy to influence. This is why emotionally impulsive individuals often feel powerful in the moment but weak in the long run. Their anger exposes them. Their need for validation exposes them. Their inability to tolerate silence, rejection, uncertainty, or disrespect exposes them. Every uncontrolled reaction becomes information others can use. Watch how quickly most people surrender their inner stability over small emotional disruptions. A delayed message changes their mood. Criticism ruins their confidence. Rejection turns into obsession. A single disagreement pulls them into emotional chaos. What they call passion is often simply a lack of discipline over their internal state. The human mind naturally seeks comfort, attention, certainty, and control. But those who immediately obey every emotional impulse become servants to temporary feelings. They speak too soon, react too fast, reveal too much, and regret their actions once emotion fades. This is why true self-control feels almost unnatural in modern life. It requires resisting the constant urge to emotionally discharge every feeling the moment it appears. There is something deeply intimidating about a person who remains calm under pressure, not emotionless controlled. The kind of individual who can be insulted without collapsing into rage, ignored without chasing validation, tempted without losing discipline, and challenged without becoming reactive. That level of restraint creates silent authority because it signals inner independence. Most people are controlled by external circumstances without realizing it. Their emotions rise and fall based on attention, approval, social status, relationships, or temporary pleasure. But the person with self-control operates differently. They decide what deserves emotional energy and what does not, and that selective discipline changes how others perceive them. Calmness becomes mistaken for confidence. Restraint becomes mistaken for strength. Silence becomes mistaken for power. In reality, all three are connected. This is also why manipulative people struggle against emotionally disciplined individuals. Manipulation depends on triggering reactions: guilt, fear, earned, anger, insecurity, desire. But when someone controls their impulses instead of obeying them, manipulation loses its entry point. The emotionally controlled person becomes difficult to provoke, difficult to read, and difficult to influence. And nothing frustrates emotionally controlling people more than realizing they cannot access your inner state. In the end, the world does not belong to the loudest, the angriest, or even the smartest. It quietly bends toward the people who have mastered themselves. Because the most terrifying realization in human psychology is this: once a person gains control over their own emotions, very little in this world can control them anymore. In the end, silence is not about punishing a woman. It is about mastering yourself, because the world is full of people who can speak, chase, react, and beg for attention. But the rarest person in any room is the one who can remain emotionally controlled while everyone else loses composure. And once you learn that skill, you begin to see a brutal truth about human nature. The people who control their emotions are usually the ones controlling the entire situation.